of the Lord. Dear friends, I found a story in a children's book about a talking teacup. Now we know teacups don't talk, but in children's books they do. Here's the story. Grandfather and grandmother were in a gift shop one day looking for something to give their granddaughter for her birthday, and suddenly the grandmother spots a beautiful teacup. "Look at this lovely teacup," she says to her husband. He picks it up and says, "You're right, this is one of the most beautiful teacups I have ever seen." And at this point, something happens that could only happen in a children's book. The teacup speaks and says to the grandparents, "Thank you for the compliment, but I wasn't always beautiful." Instead of being surprised that the teacup can talk, the grandfather and grandmother simply ask, "What do you mean when you say that you weren't always beautiful?" "Well," says the teacup, "once I was just an ugly, soggy lump of clay. But one day, some man with dirty, wet hands threw me on a wheel, and he started turning me round and round until I got so dizzy I could hardly see straight. 'Stop, stop,' I said. But the man with the wet hand says, 'Not yet.' Then he started to poke me and punch me until I hurt all over. 'Stop, stop,' I cried. But the man said, 'Not yet.' Finally, he did stop, but then he did something even worse. He put me into a furnace. It got hotter and hotter until I couldn't stand it. 'Stop, stop,' I said. But the man said, 'Not yet.' Finally, when I thought I was going to burn up, the man took me out of the furnace. Then some short lady began to paint me. The fumes from the paint got so bad that they made me sick to my stomach. 'Stop, stop,' I cried. 'Not yet,' said the lady. Finally, she did stop, but then she gave me back to the man again, and he put me back in that awful furnace. This time it was hotter than even before. 'Stop, stop,' I said. 'Not yet,' the man said. Finally, he took me out of the furnace and let me cool, and when I was completely cool, a pretty lady put me on this shelf next to this mirror. When I looked into the mirror, I was amazed. I could not believe what I saw. I was no longer ugly, soggy, and dirty. I was beautiful, firm, and clean. I cried for joy. And then it was that I realized that all that pain was worthwhile. Without that pain, I would still be ugly, dirty, soggy. And it was then that all that pain took on a meaning for me. It had passed away, but the beauty that it brought remained. An interesting children's story, and it contains the same message, really, in today's gospel. Jesus says to the men on the road to Emmaus, "Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things before entering into his glory?" Jesus adds elsewhere in the gospel that what had happened to him has to happen to us too. Remember, he said, "No slave is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also." And in another place, "You cannot be my disciple if you do not pick up your cross and follow in my footsteps." What the gospel is saying to us is if we are to rise to glory as Jesus did, it's necessary that we carry our cross and undergo some suffering too. And when this is happening, we cry out, "Stop, stop." But in the end, we will cry for joy just as the teacup did and just as Jesus did. That's the message in today's gospel passage. It's a message that if we are to become something useful and beautiful for God, we must undergo a certain amount of suffering. I found this snippet from a homily that was given, actually, I would say 1,500 years ago by St. Augustine. This is part of a sermon that he gave to people. "You are like a piece of pottery, shaped by instruction, fired by tribulation. When you are put into the oven, therefore, keep your thoughts on the time when you will be taken out again. For God is faithful and will guard both your going in and your coming out." I want to close with this story. It's one of my favorite stories. It's about the French painter Henri Matisse. Matisse died in the mid-50s at an advanced age. He was well into his 80s. And in the last years of his life, arthritis had crippled and deformed his hands, making it painful for him even to hold a paintbrush. Yet he continued to paint, placing a cloth between his fingers to keep the brush from slipping. And one day someone said to him, "Why do you continue to submit your body to such great physical pain?" And Matisse replied, "The pain passes away, but the beauty remains." In a similar way, the pain that you and I experience in being shaped into something useful and beautiful for God will pass. But the beauty of what we become in the process will remain forever and ever and ever. Amen. I invite you now we will profess our faith using the Apostles' Creed.